Well, hello and welcome. We're at the World Economic Forum, certainly on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum, where India is very much a focus. It is every single year. One of the governments, the state governments, doing a great deal of work in terms of talking about key issues, whether it is job transformation, artificial intelligence, sustainability, or perhaps even the climate, is the government of Andhra Pradesh, one of our most vibrant states, looking to really explain the Andhra Pradesh story to a global audience, certainly a lot of people over here. Nara Lokesh, who we have with us, one of our young leaders who has a real interest in artificial intelligence and technology and in bringing tech and industry together to benefit millions across the state. He is also the IT Minister of Andhra Pradesh. He looks after electronics, communications, and HRD. What we are talking about today is artificial intelligence for good, shaping a smarter, sustainable tomorrow. And we've got a wonderful panel with us. Matt Renner is President of Global Revenue at Google Cloud. Thanks very much for being with us. Archana Vyas, who I've worked with very closely for many years, Director Program Advocacy at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Emily Sfelli is the Director of Partnerships and Initiatives at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Thank you very much for being with us. Nara Lokesh, let me come to you first. When we talk about AI and public good, it can only happen if there is the public sector and the private sector working together. A lot of the technology comes from outside, but you have your own idea of how it'll work. How is that partnership crucial?
I mean, Andhra Pradesh is always known for being at the cutting edge of technology and governance, or GovTech as we call it. In the third term of Mr. Naidu, we had the Real-Time Governance Center in place. And that was where we were assimilating all the data across various data sets and how can we use it for real-time decision making. But now with AI arriving, I think it can fundamentally transform governance. And I'll give you a few examples of what we're doing. First one is education. From being a passive learner to an active learner in the classroom. So we're doing this project where, it's a 45 minutes class, and then you have a 2-minute video, which we're working with the Khan Academy. And we're coming up with 5 questions at the end and gamifying it and giving kids a clicker, a simple clicker with A, B, C, D option. And sort of gamifying it and using AI to actually prescribe homework based on results. And we want to track this data in a very, very long term. So that's one example of it. The other example is using AI in identifying beneficiaries for various government programs. That's the second project that we're doing. Third project is delivery of government services using technology. So we have an agreement where through various platforms we can now deliver, and one of it being ahead is Meta on it.
Right.
WhatsApp governance, as we call it. And we're also working with Google in a similar platform. So I think there's a role to play. Government's job is to open up and create use cases that can then be scaled up.
Yep.
But then, of course, I think the initiative will also have to be led by the innovators across the world.
In fact, Matt Renner, that brings me to the role of Google. And before we started this conversation, you were telling me a little bit about specific examples. Mm-hmm. I was fascinated by what Google brings in terms of AI and healthcare. Mm-hmm. And I also do believe that when it comes to diagnosing illnesses long distance, using the benefits of AI, it could have massive impacts in a country as large as India. Mm-hmm. Could you share a few examples of what Google is doing?
Sure, and again, I think anywhere that you have a lot of data that you could crunch very quickly and come up with an accurate answer, AI is a great use case in most cases than not. For maternal health is a good use case that we're working in India at this point. One of the issues we had around mammograms and the time behind a mammogram was the time around diagnosis and the length of time, and how it impacted the ultimate result. Prior to AI and prior to utilizing these models, it took upwards of 5 days to get the result back to the patient. Problem with that is only about 20% of the patients came back once they got the information about this to go back to the doctor. So the AI use case we now put together is we can do a mammogram, run the numbers with very extreme accuracy within 5 minutes. So the patient hasn't left the doctor's office, right? So that's a good example of not just speeding up something for productivity, but it's a good example of changing the outcome, which I think is super important when you talk about health.
So AI actually analyzes a mammogram. It sort of diagnoses whatever it is, passes on that information to the doctor. So you've got essentially two eyes.
Correct.
one real eye, one artificial eye, be that as it may, but potential solutions and certainly a diagnosis. That's what it does, right?
In that specific use case, yes. Right.
Could you give us a few more examples of?
Sure.
Of
in healthcare, some of the things we're doing. So there's in all variations, right? There'll be some opportunities to look into AlphaFold, which again is genomic 3D imaging, where you can that was released by DeepMind within Google, but ultimately is pattern. That's a public global scenario that Demis Hassabis, and I know he's having a chance to meet with Bill Gates this week, but Demis had won the Nobel Peace Prize for this, right? Ultimately, yes. He and Mr. Jumper as well on our team. So a fantastic example where that's more just for research, as you're digging into research. When you get into diagnosis, and I gave that example for a mammogram, but even the diagnosis around cancer itself. So the contouring process where you're going to apply radiation usually takes somewhere between 7 or 8 hours for a technician to go through all of your slides, all of your pictures, if you will, to find what's the healthy tissue versus the cancerous tissue and where to apply the radiation. By applying AI models to that, in this specific case, you could take that down into about a third the time, even a quarter the time. Why does that matter? More time with the patient, see more patients, diagnose more patients, right? At the end of the day, and when you're dealing with India, right, with this incredible number of people that have to go through, a lot of times it's the bottlenecks that you run into that we're trying to clear when you talk about healthcare. So probably an example there which bleeds into treatment as well, but that from that effect.
Now, Lokesh, how would you roll something out like this, where every last district potentially has access to an AI diagnosis to speed up treatment of patients?
If you look at it, there are a few tools that have come out where by doing just a facial scan and using AI, the basic health parameters actually can be captured. Mm-hmm. And a few of them are under FDA review. So there is a potential to actually roll this out for every citizen. And this is a great way of democratizing healthcare in that sense and doing pre-diagnosis of this. And then, of course, deploying all the tools that you just explained. Mm-hmm. That's post a test. Mm-hmm. So can we look at preventive healthcare proactively? And I think that's where AI can play a very, very important role. And what I just shared is one of the tools that's under consideration.
Yeah. Archana, let's look at some of the other potentially transformative areas which involve AI. Climate change is a huge problem. Public health crises are some other issues which we are all dealing with. I think my question to you has to do with equity. And AI is available to some, it's not necessarily available to others. In as much as we have a 5G revolution in India, we are heading to a 6G revolution in India, there are deep divides between those who actually have smartphones and those who don't. Therefore, how do you and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation deal with the issue of AI and equity?
First of all, I must congratulate for putting AI for social good on the agenda. So my congratulations to you, Minister. One, I think my panelists have spoken about how AI can transform health as well as education. At Gates Foundation, we deeply care about equity and access, and the fact that despite the fact that digital tools and digital ecosystem can be transformational for those who have access to it, it should not leave behind people who do not have access to it. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that as these digital breakthroughs happen, it is important to think about infrastructure. It is important to think about digital capacity that should be available to people who are in the last mile, but also the technology itself has to be inclusive. That, the emphasis on the fact that this design has to be participatory. A lot of work that's being done, especially in terms of LLM as well as machine learning, getting voice of community into these tools is going to be super important. At Gates Foundation, we work on first principle basis. There is a task force on AI within the Gates Foundation that looks at all of the work that's happening across global health, but also, like you said, in the case of climate, agriculture, so that we make sure that we are looking at AI technology from an equity lens and from an access lens. The fact that we are upholding the principles of privacy as well as safeguarding, those principles and protecting people, but also thinking about capacities at the last mile. A lot of work that's being done, not only in terms of health, which is about, diagnostics that you've spoken about, but also, how these tools can be made available to community health workers so that they can think about medical care of people who do not have access. Again, teleconsultation, faster diagnostics, health access to poor people. Likewise, EdTech for students who do not have access to education. These are some of the areas that we're looking at.
Emily, as somebody who's sort of managed several health crises, whether it's COVID or Ebola recovery strategies, the link between or the potential use of AI and disaster management, whether it is pandemics or a natural disaster, how could it potentially work?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the first thing to say is I think it's really interesting when we're in crisis, because this is a state where actually governments and private sector do innovation very well, because it's all hands on deck in a crisis. And so you see government coming together with private sector to rapidly look at new ways to digest information and to respond in effective ways. And this gets even more exciting with AI, whether it's a pandemic or natural disasters. So I work for the Tony Blair Institute. We work with 40 governments around the world with their leaders to help them get things done. And one of the main things we look at is how technology can help them do that faster and better. So in terms of natural disasters, two big things that I think are really important with AI. One is looking at how do we prepare for natural disasters. We'll be able to do this in completely new ways with AI. And then the second is how do we respond to it? In the first, in terms of preparing, so one specific example now, we have satellite imagery of the entire Earth basically every day. There's companies that do this. That's incredible. But it's also a ton of data to actually use. So with AI modeling, we can take the historical satellite data from the last 7 years, put it with the weather data from the last 7 years, put it with what has happened with natural disasters, and we get a very effective model for assessing how this weather is going to impact this area. In the hands of governments, that's an incredibly powerful tool to plan for what's going to happen next. And we have a partnership right now with the government of Philippines, actually, to build out a new model so that they can prepare for landslides. So that's one example. Then in terms of responding, similarly, you can get incredibly rapid assessments of the damage that has been done after a natural disaster using satellite imagery and AI again, which can then help governments plan where do we need to respond first, what is the damage, how do we get there, and after a natural disaster, getting there 24 hours faster or accelerating that path to coordinate all the actors can save lives. So this is just two examples, I would say, that governments should be looking at with private sector to apply AI in the space of natural disasters and climate.
Satellite imagery has transformed journalism, I can tell you that as well. I do a great deal of my work based on satellite imagery.
Just to build on that, I mean, we had similar work cases. The first example, right, of prevention, which I think is super important, and in a living example. So we've got over 100 countries that are utilizing an application at this point to prevent flood damage. But more importantly, we can now predict 7 days in advance with relative accuracy as to when a major flood is coming, right, for that perspective. And in some countries, that'll save hundreds of millions of lives. I mean, if you think about it through some of the scenarios over the course of numerous years in 100 countries. So it's becoming real. I mean, we do see that that was an obvious use case, but again, it comes back to there's a tremendous amount of data in weather, right, for that variability.
Yeah.
We still can't completely predict the weather, but we can come close, right, I think is probably the best way to put it.
Archana, would you like to comment on that?
And another partnership that we have with Google in terms of how do farmers, and this is in the area of response, how do smallholder farmers respond when there is adverse event, but also because of fantastic work that's being done in India, whether it's digital identity, data exchange, which is interoperable but also safe and privately managed, farmer advisories in their own language can actually help them prevent themselves from either pests, but also advisory in terms of how can they increase their produce and how can they be more profitable. Mm-hmm. So it is advisory for climate disaster, advisory in terms of productivity as well as profitability, and some of the, extremely path-breaking work that's being done across states. And it can lead to increase in GDP. So it is not only about disaster management, but also in terms of how can you proactively increase profitability of people who are towards the end of the spectrum.
Mr. Lokesh, let me ask you, there are cynics who say that in a country like India, AI might be bad news. We are an agrarian economy to a large extent. We do rely on manual labor. If you do have AI, then there could be a concern about jobs going away. And yet, you speak about the benefits of AI. Can these work together?
I mean, if you look at it, jobs are under threat, but they're typically the white-collar jobs.
Yeah.
I think and every industrial revolution has shown that it creates more jobs than what people lose. History shows that. So I don't believe that AI will reduce the number of jobs, but I think it will change the order of jobs. And then I believe the jobs that are going to get created in the next decades are going to be in areas that we're yet to discover. And that puts a lot of pressure on HRD ministers like me who are trying to figure out the curriculum and the entire ecosystem. Saying that, fundamentally AI is here. It's going to change our lives. And as a government, we are looking at how can we expose women to basic AI tools, students to basic AI tools, because farmers to basic AI tools. I think that can fundamentally transform their lives. It can double their income in certain use cases. So just giving them that access and exposure alone can transform the way they're living.
Do you mind if I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think it's undeniable that AI is going to disrupt. And so you can either choose to be disrupted or the disruptor. And what I think is so incredible about what the ministers just said is by taking a proactive approach, particularly to education and upskilling, you're enabling your people to be the disruptors and to be the ones driving that job creation.
And
Let's talk about skilling.
Yeah, one of the areas where we are seeing great results, and this is in partnership with Microsoft, is that rural women who were otherwise sitting at home and did not have jobs, now because of AI, can lend their voice for LLM purposes.
Right, large language models, yeah.
And they are now getting economically benefited. And because of LLM, they're not only getting economically benefited, they're also correcting for algorithms as far as AI is concerned, which can be biased because women's representation is not in those algorithms. So I think there is huge potential in terms of how you can, like the minister said, that how you can look at people who could be marginalized in local communities and what kind of jobs may be available to them, but also correcting for AI as well.
Just going into the future, what is the AI interface going to be for us? Right now we've got chatbots, we've got lots of options amongst them. Some of them talk to us, some of them don't, some are text-based. Right. So how are you and I going to engage AI for our lives, let's say 10 years from now?
So every time I get a question that I'm supposed to answer, like for 5 to 10, I always say, can I do 1 to 2? Because it's just a lot easier to figure it out. If you look back 12 months, 15 months, 18 months, the velocity that AI has transformed itself in the different applicability. You look at multimodal across video and voice and across all, it's incredible what's already being put out. I'd be guessing at 10 years. I mean, to be candid with you, there's this concept of AGI as you get into where will we ever cross over into that? There's a lot of philosophies, folks a lot smarter than I am that can give you an opinion on that, whether that will ever come to fruition, because it is a debate, and when it will come into fruition. But that's kind of the next frontier if we ever get there. I feel like a lot of what we're doing now is going to refine, but it's amazing how many companies that have spun up that are AI related right now just because of what it's enabling to do, to get better at voice, better to go across language, to get across everything from sight or the entire experience that you can now consume multimodal wise, and most of the models can do that now. So it's tough to say 5 to 10 years. I think you're definitely going to see this continue to accelerate with consuming multiple types of data and combining it into one experience for individuals. And I think that will continue from that perspective.
Emily, there's the entire issue of regulation and laws which safeguard. Who decides those laws and those safeguards? Because, we live in an interconnected world.
Well, the government sets the laws. But what I want to say here is it's really important for governments to open up the conversation with the private sector and to be in the room together and in dialogue, and not just at WEF or at a roundtable or on a panel, but actually going through the problems together. And so, there's a couple things that I think we've seen work, which is when governments really do enter into here's the problem, this is what we need to solve, let's really hash it out with a number of private sector actors in the room. We want to protect these things, but we also want to innovate in this way. Let's do it together. So that's one. The second is that governments can set up sandbox environments with private sector companies where there is a safe space, where we're innovating together, there's some level of protection, we're making sure that it's safe before we roll it out. But I would also say, since we're at a global event and going beyond India, I would just say, for governments, it's really important, I would say, not to race to setting your AI standards, because if you do it too prematurely, you're going to stifle the innovation. And then to go back to my comment earlier, you're going to be in that disrupted state. So that real collaboration between private sector and governments right now is critical. And most private sector companies that I speak to, or others will speak to, Google, et cetera, are looking for governments to do this regulation and keep it safe, because it's not something that the private sector can do on their own.
Yeah. We're going to start wrapping this up. Archana, go ahead.
Yeah, just one or 2 points. One is that I think as the government thinks about regulation, it's really important that you think about communities, right? What we haven't spoken about during our discussion is the fact that those capacities for misinformation, as AI is evolving, or technology is evolving, there is a huge need for capacity building at the last mile. People should understand the perils that technology also bring together, and therefore when the regulations are made, they should be based on, one is protecting people and safeguarding privacy, but also thinking about interoperability, data exchange, therefore collection of data in a manner that health data, agriculture data, education data is standardized, can talk to each other, which is what India is known for with its digital public infrastructure work that's been done. And the last point I would say is, as you think about regulation, think about voice of community as well. Bring them; they should also be represented as the regulations are made, so that the AI itself is inclusive, it delivers social good for what it's been envisioned, and can deliver economic progress as well, with private sector coming in and partnerships.
Mr. Lokesh, one last word from you. Isn't it wonderful that we live in India, in a country which has 5G, we are moving to 6G, with the lowest data costs in the world, and with huge numbers. When 3G became 4G, we were cynics. When 4G became 5G, we became cynics. But the speed of communications is incredible. How much are your dreams about Andhra Pradesh and AI closely linked to the continued rollout and the inexpensive rollout of data and 5G technology?
I mean, access to data has fundamentally transformed India. I mean, if you look at, there are enough of reports that suggest as per capita consumption of data goes up, so does per capita income.
Yeah.
It's tightly correlated. So as a state, our job is to bring about that access. It could be through a government intervention or enabling the private sector by right of way or any other mechanisms, and make it very affordable. But parallelly, what I believe is very, very important is exposing our citizens to the various tools, again, and explaining to them the perils of those tools. Then I think the citizens, greater part of society, can actually take an informed decision on how to use these tools a lot more effectively. And we are seeing that. We've seen that in agriculture, we've seen that in healthcare, we've seen that in aqua. We're now starting that with education. So I think both of them go in parallel.
Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. It's a fascinating conversation, but one which will rapidly change over the years. I suspect if we have the same panelists 3 or 4 years down the road, when AI itself and the technology available starts evolving to new requirements, then perhaps the contours of this entire discussion would be very different. But that's what makes it so tremendously exciting. What is the future of AI? I suspect not very many know what it would truly be. Thank you very much for being with us.